With Wakanda announcing its plans to indeed stick around forever, a renewed interest in comics and illustrations is emerging. What better time than to take a brief look into the history of Black representation in the art form of the comic? Now, as always, remember that this is merely a very brief primer, so don't be afraid to dig in much, much deeper. There is much treasure to be found. As segregation and separate but equal was the way of the good old US of A in the first half of the 1900s, so it was too for the American comic book industry. Prior to 1957, racial segregation laws prevented Black writers and animators from working for white comic book publishers. The law prohibited them from creating content for a white readership. And so, artists such as Jay Jackson, a high school dropout at age 13, spike driver for the railroad and former boxer, began to sell illustrations to the Chicago Defender, an African-American newspaper. By 1933, he was placed in charge of the cartoon division, where he illustrated such notable creations as Bungleton Green and the Mystic Commandos. He would go on to work for such magazines as Amazing Stories and Fantastic Adventures. In 1937, a few years after Jackson became head of cartoons, Jackie Orme became the first Black woman cartoonist to be published. Starting at the Pittsburgh Courier as a freelance journalist, Orme created the character of Torchy Brown. Then, in the 1940s, there was Matt Baker, a penciler and illustrator who worked on such publications as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and Vuda. His work proved so popular that white comic book companies such as Atlas Comics bought him out to illustrate their books. 1947 was a particularly important year for Black artists, thanks to Orrin Cromwell Evans. Evans was the first Black journalist at the Philadelphia Record newspaper, which closed in 1947. Evans then decided to create his own publishing company, which he named All Negro Comics, Inc. Their first publication, All Negro Comics, was 48 pages of comic illustrations and stories created exclusively by Black artists. This would unfortunately be their last publication. Among the tales told in All Negro Comics was a tale that introduced the first Black superhero, Lion Man. Aside from being notable in that its superhero was depicted as Black, the character representations were new and refreshing. Lion Man is an educated Black man adorned in loincloth and head and armbands. Lion Man is tasked with protecting a uranium deposit of Africa's Gold Coast. As Siobhan Thomas noted in her history of the Black superhero for Digital Spy, this was a far cry from other comic book characters of the time, such as Tintin, where Black characters were often portrayed as violent, uneducated, and lazy. This was a well-regarded, strong individual, proud of his African heritage, and hoping to inspire readership to do the same. The single issue of All Negro Comics allowed for a sole editor's letter, in which Evans said, "Every brushstroke and pen line in the drawings on these pages are by Negro artists. All Negro Comics is another milestone in the splendid history of Negro journalism." The milestone would be this singular issue alone. When the paper mills found out it was a Black man trying to buy a newsprint to print a comic book, they refused to sell it to him so that he couldn't publish the second issue, comic historian Ken Quattro says. There was such deeply rooted systemic racism they never even had a chance. Quattro himself has written an invaluable investigation into the history of Black comic book artists, Invisible Men, the trailblazing Black artists of comic books, for IDW. And so, the introduction of Lion Man was also the last time that we would see him. However, nearly 20 years later, comic book audiences would be introduced to another superhero protecting an African country. In 1966, the Black Panther was introduced in Fantastic Four issue number 52. This character would thrive. However, unfortunately, it took an incarnation of the African hero as rendered by white artists. The Black Panther was a creation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Predating the founding of the Black Panther Party in October of 1966, Lee has labeled the shared name as a strange coincidence. And Marvel even went so far as to rename the Black Panther as the Black Leopard to disassociate it from the party. The name did not last. The name was said to be inspired by a pulp adventure hero with a Black Panther for a sidekick. While the similarities between the Black Panther and Lion Man are striking, it should be noted that the Black Panther was the first Black hero with superpowers. The Black Panther's abilities were enhanced beyond normal human powers through the Wakandan ritual of drinking the distillation of a heart-shaped herb, as well as other Wakandan technology. In an interview with the Comics Journal in 1990, Black Panther co-creator Jack Kirby commented, "I came up with the Black Panther because I realized I had no Black people in my strip. I suddenly discovered that I had a lot of Black readers. My first friend was Black, and here I was, ignoring them because I was associating with everyone else." It may be worth noting that Stan Lee also claims credit for creating the first black superhero, citing a desire in the mid-60s for Marvel Comics to be more inclusive of African and African-American characters. In either case, Lee was hesitant of this first step, as evidenced by the cover of Fantastic Four 52, which features the Black Panther in a full face mask, rather than the cowl that exposed the Black Panther's face. The success of the Black Panther would help usher in a new era of black superheroes. Unfortunately, the artists behind these creations would nearly always be white. In April 1970, DC Comics unveiled their first black superhero, Mal Duncan, in Teen Titans number 26. Created by Robert Kanigher and Nick Cardy, both white artists, of course, they further made history when Mal kissed Lilith Clay, a Caucasian superheroine, in what is considered the first interracial comic book kiss. The scene was originally objected to, but editor Dick Giordano opted to keep the scene, albeit colored in blue in an effort to draw less attention. DC Comics followed this up in December 1971, with Green Lantern John Stewart in the Green Lantern 87, created by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, two white artists. From here, a sprinkling of new comic book heroes of color would appear. Marvel's Luke Cage in 1972, Blade and Brother Voodoo in 1973. In 1975, in giant-sized X-Men number 1, Marvel gave us the fan-favorite Storm, the first X-Men of color. The 1980s continued the trend of new superheroes of color, although the numbers appear to have slowed. Marv Wolfman, co-creator of Blade, debuted Cyborg for DC in 1980, and Vixen first appeared in Action Comics 152 in 1981. In Marvel comic books, the second Captain Marvel was introduced in the form of the black female Monica Rambeau in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16 in 1982. Cloak and Dagger were a biracial couple who first appeared in Spider-Man comics. We also have the introduction of Iron Man's friend and pilot, James Rhodey Rhodes, who would assume the role of Iron Man in Iron Man 169. In 1992, white artist Todd McFarlane brought massive success to the indie publication company Image Comics with his comic book Spawn, featuring a black superhero returned from the dead. While McFarlane was often asked why he made Al Simmons, aka Spawn, black, he maintained no political agenda. The fact that this was a topic of discussion shows that even with superheroes of color now existing in multiple forms for decades, the decision still brought with it questions that wouldn't be asked of a new white hero. Unfortunately, a catalog of the black comic book hero is an easier task than one of the black comic book artist. It should be noticed that black artists were often not acknowledged in mainstream publications, and that most libraries and universities didn't preserve black comics in periodicals. Cartoonist Keith Knight, author of the comic strip K Chronicles, has been vocal about the historical erasure of African American contributions to the arts. "I'm not surprised," he says. "It's sad to say how normal it is to see the contributions of black people ignored and/or erased. I'm just happy to see these artists finally have a spotlight belatedly shown on them." With this new spotlight and interest, a new slew of talented artists are cropping up. One such young artist is James III, a comic writer who has worked on numerous comics such as Archie. Following after the great Orrin Cromwell Evans, James III is creating his own indie comics company, Rule of Three Comics, a black-owned comic company working with black writers and artists. Black artists have begun to have their voices heard and their work seen in graphic novels such as The Black Panther Party by David F. Walker and Marcus Kwame Anderson, and The Banks by Roxane Gay. Black artists in black comics have come a long way, and it's an exciting time. Now, with new opportunities available and certain roadblocks removed, the future of comics looks to be bright and flooded with new voices and talent. While certainly not an even playing field, the interest in these voices and stories should hopefully indicate a market for work from such artists. So, get to your local comic shop and see what stories you still have to discover. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and hit that like button.